Good morning, good afternoon, and kaya to everyone who's joined us today. Welcome to our NAIDOC Week Yarning Circle, and we are very happy to have you all join us today. NAIDOC Week celebrations have started earlier this week, and as they do every year across the first week of July, and it recognises and celebrates our history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples. NAIDOC Week is an opportunity for all Australians to learn and celebrate First Nations people, cultures, people, histories, and participate in those celebrations of our oldest continuous living culture on this planet. I am so excited today to have a great yarn with my brother and sister here today. Joining us is Bruce Hammond, Bush Heritage Healthy Landscape Managers in South Australia, or the South East. And we've also got Vikki Parsley, our Aboriginal Partnerships Officer in New South Wales. I do send, and we apologise for Stefina. We haven't got her today. However, she has stepped out for family business and she sends her regards. So to kick things off, I would like to introduce you to Bruce and Vikki. But Bruce, I'd love to hear from you if you wouldn't mind saying hello, and we'll get to some acknowledgements in a minute.
Welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time to get in the yarning circle with us. For those that don't know me, I'm Bruce Hammond, the Healthy Landscapes Manager from South Australia. Today I come from Kaurna country, and I'd just like to pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands I'm on. I acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. I personally am fortunate to have a rare mix of saltwater and central desert peoples, from the waters of southern, eastern South Australia, Tungana Cold, Meantang and Bondic, and the desert surrounds of Alice Springs, Hermannsburg and Finke, Eastern Arunta. Thank you,
Bruce. Vikki.
Thanks, Chontarle. Thanks, Bruce. I'd like to introduce myself, Vikki Parsley. I'm a Yuin Walbunja woman from the New South Wales South Coast of New South Wales, and I'm really excited to be here today and participate in the yarning circle.
Thanks, Vikki. And myself, I'm a Wadandi Bibbulmun woman from the southwest of Western Australia, ties to both the saltwater caves, karri trees and beautiful country in the south, as I have behind me today. But I sit and live and work and play and acknowledge the Yamatji peoples of the Ngarrindjeri, Amangu and Willinyu people of Geraldton that I sit, play, and I bring my family up actually on this country here. So to get started today with Bruce and Vikki, I'm so pleased to have this conversation with you. And I think this is one of my favourite times of the year, but it also brings in these important conversations that are a part of every Australian's, a part of every Australian. And I think this is where we need to ask both yourself and, Vikki and Bruce, what does NAIDOC mean to you? And with this year's theme, Get Up, Stand Up and Show Up, what does that mean to you? Vikki, can you give it a go for me?
Thanks, Chontarle. So this year we've got, as you've mentioned, the Get Up, Stand Up, Show Up theme. It's really, really important, this year's theme, because it calls upon action to be taken from everybody. It's about calling out structural changes, calling out racism within our communities, and basically standing up and being a part of the conversation of early colonisation and supporting Aboriginal rights in Australia. It's a really important time. It's a time where community people can all come together, learn a little bit more about our history. This is history that's not unfamiliar to ourselves. We grow up in families where this is taught from a really young age. We learn in Aboriginal families growing up the early history of colonisation, the impacts on our families. This is a really good time now for communities to join together as a collective and to speak together.
That's beautiful, Vikki. Bruce, I'd love to hear your perspective on NAIDOC and this year's theme.
Yeah, and I always think it's important for a bit of reflection around NAIDOC. The National Aboriginal and Islanders Day Observance Committee, it evolved from our community needing to create greater awareness about the negative social, political and health outcomes of Aboriginal and Islander peoples. That's why it exists. And some people think it's a day of celebration, and us mob love a celebration, but it evolved from an observance to the wrongs in our communities. And quite simply, the issues put up were to request full citizen status and equality within the community. And I think we're still, struggling with that a bit today. There's been massive gains, and I'm so appreciative of that, but there's still plenty to do. So for me, NAIDOC's community coming together collectively, supporting positive change, and to celebrate those that have already driven and led change in Aboriginal and Islander communities over the generations. Now, get up, stand up and show up, I think is just deadly, because for me and my family and my communities, it's quite simply to represent, something we do every day. And we're really proud to discuss that with you today. I know personally there isn't a day myself, my colleagues and my wider community doesn't get up, stand up or show up. As leaders in our respective communities, it's our responsibility to right the wrongs we see daily in our communities. It's not a choice, and it's something that's not forced or planned. It just happens. And I just want to say we all do this at different times and at different levels, but we all do it. And to be honest, sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. It's our way, and always striving for a better community. And that's what NAIDOC means to me.
Excellent. Bruce and Vikki, what a way to wrap up NAIDOC. It is about truth telling. It is about what we'll delve into a little bit later with our yarn, still about finding equity and equality within Australia's, systems, what we have to work with. And also it is, it's not just about that celebration, it's also about our challenges that we still persist today. So thank you both. I guess I also want to say, for those listening and viewing and part of this conversation today, please ask any questions in the question and answer box. We'd like you to be quite participatory. And also I want to thank you all for those have also put into the box of their acknowledgement of country, because I can see a lot of them coming through from all around different countries across Australia. And thank you again. So I guess, talking about different countries across Australia, I'd love to hear from yourself, Bruce and Vikki, about your connection to country. What does that mean when working in this sector? We work for a not-for-profit conservation organisation. So working with traditional owners, with some of our mobs. So can you tell me what that means to you working with bush heritage? Bruce.
I mean, the connection to country for Aboriginal and Islander peoples, it defines who we are. It defines our language and our cultural obligations to family and the landscape. And I've described it as, country's not to be owned, but rather it owns you. Our defined country on cultural boundaries determines day-to-day interactions and provides area for cultural practice and law. And, people often struggle with that. And I say it's a bit like living in a Coles supermarket and a St. Paul's Cathedral at the same time. You've got your business place, you've got the country providing everything that you need, and country doesn't simply exist, but, we exist for it. Every sort of social interaction is bound by country and our obligation to it. Not having access to land, land that is rightfully ours, and it continues to negative impact on my communities. So working with bush heritage and being able to introduce a partnership of equity, genuine and open discussions about, our shared history, which is, pretty tragic, I think is really important. We are a conversation maker. We are often, as Aboriginal people working with bush heritage, the door openers to the harder questions and the harder discussions that we know we've got to have. The management of the landscape is something Aboriginal and Islander people have done for thousands of years. It's a key element to sustainability. That's a shared outcome. It's about our country, our community, and our law. Our cultural business is happening later due to climate change. It's really interesting to have an assessment of when our regional people with language and law are doing their business, and it's now 4 months later in the year, simply because the cycles of the seasons have changed. So that really impacts, and old people have been saying that probably for the last 10 or 20 years. So the ability to manage and access country and impart knowledge to the future generations is just so critical. We reinforce relationships with physical, cultural, social, economic and spiritual environments. You know, I want to really say that the work that Bush Heritage does is a joint shared partnership, and achieving it benefits everyone. When Aboriginal people have success on country, there are a whole heap of other things that happen. You know, the positive landscape, the water, you know, erosion, all of these things have been managed. Fire, which, you know, Vikki is so proudly part of, and that management of the landscape all benefit our programs on the ground. So I'm really proud to say that Bush Heritage, as a partner of equity, is on the front foot. Yeah, there's plenty of work to do, but we're on the front foot.
That's excellent. Thank you, Bruce. And I think, you know, one of the biggest ones that you mentioned there, it not only benefits the people around us, but our future generations of all Australians. Vikki.
Connection to country. So that was some really good conversation there, Bruce. Just following on from that, connection to country for me as an Aboriginal woman stems from my knowledge of my country, my connection to landscape, the stories, the plants, the animals that are there. Being able to go into country and have that connection maintains part of my identity, also helps with my spiritual growth as well. Connection to country in Bush Heritage provides opportunities through our roles to actually engage with Aboriginal communities and traditional owners so that they can actually be a part of those conversations, to link them into landscapes where they can have part and be involved in decision-making processes, and also be informed with the work that we are doing at the ground level. This has many positive outcomes for Aboriginal traditional owners in by that we can support them to have active land management participate. There's the wellbeing aspects that we talked about, and Bruce also talked about mentioned at the moment, part of my involvement at Bush Heritage has been supporting traditional owners through cultural burning practices. The outcomes of seeing traditional owners maintaining those landscape connections, coming into country, being able to burn also has wellbeing aspects. And we can see the positive outcomes at the end of the day after people have actively been out on the ground. It's that spiritual connection that we have. It's the being able to actively be a part of managing that landscape. And it's really nice because some of the outcomes that I'm hearing and conversations at the moment from community are people saying about how they feel that they've actually cleaned up the landscape. It's a part of almost like housekeeping, so to speak, to burn off country again and to turn around and take that pride in looking at the removal of weeds, and that you're opening up pathways and improving the vegetation systems in that landscape is utterly important. So working here at Bush Heritage is really important that we are in these roles and that we can provide those links for traditional owners to come in and participate in that.
That's a beautiful way to wrap up our connection to country through working in the conservation sector, Bruce and Vikki. And you know, we spend a lot of time with our elders and even the younger generations. And one of the things that really stands out with what you've both spoken of is our not just our connection, but the understanding that everything is a living being, is a living spirit. And when we have cleaned up as housekeeping, as you said, Vikki, when we've cleaned up and we've also, you know, whether that's through fire or cleaning up our rock holes, our nama holes, or we are collecting and gathering our foods, we are also paying respect to those that have gone before us, but also continuing that connection to our next generations. And in a way, we're also enabling our better health. And you mentioned well-being, but it's also bettering the health for not only the earth and the plants and the animals, but better health for us. There is no separation between that. So, which leads me to talk with you both about the importance of Aboriginal partnerships and shared management of country. As we understand, some of us talk about stolen country. We talk about the impact of colonisation on Australia and on Australian Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And when we talk about this, we're also talking about the opportunity to care for country, but how we do it the tools that are at hand, particularly when we're working with bush heritage. So I'd love to, how about we'll flick Vikki, if you can maybe, give us share some info on that.
Sorry, can you just
sure.
repeat that question?
It's about the importance of that shared management of country with bush heritage. And you did, both yourself and Bruce have touched on that, but it's really about the importance of this and the importance. So it's expanding on our previous question about that connection to country.
Yeah, so having community come in and actively participate and in management is a really big thing. And in the partnership space, the importance and the relevance for us to be able to link people in. It's about empowering communities as well. We're supporting in the partnership space, governance structures so that communities can take ownership down the track. It's empowering communities so that they can take the next leadership role, I suppose, in that space to actively manage land and country. It's about also supporting them so that they have the tools and the knowledge to be able to know which organisations, which avenues that they can reach out to further strengthen that. And that also has a lot of benefits in the long term with, again, going back, as you mentioned, to strengthening that connection to country, because we do realise that if we have strong, healthy people with good knowledge to manage country, the outcomes are going to be much more successful and the value there that is increased through that. We also have that space where we can share this knowledge and work quite closely with scientists and professionals in the field. So there's that transition both ways of knowledge being disseminated between Western frameworks and Indigenous knowledge systems. That in the long run is only going to have better outcomes and strengthen the, the understanding for both peoples in the long run. And I know that even going back to that conversation at the moment about the cultural burning work that I'm supporting with communities at the moment, one of the biggest conversations that's coming out of that is Western groups looking and basically saying, how can we utilise this type of knowledge also in terms of asset management? Because everybody experiences these changes at the moment at a local level with climate change. So even just having that capacity there to strengthen Indigenous people and their identity and their ability to participate in those conversations will go a long way in future. And the collaboration is quite positive with the outcomes of that. People at this point in time are willing to be a part of that conversation. People are at a point where they want to know more. They want to see it, how that can benefit all peoples and not just particularly traditional owners.
I'll throw it to you, Bruce.
All right, and look, I just really enjoy that we're having this discussion about partnerships built on equity, in an otherwise wildly unbalanced system, quote unquote, in my view. The shared management of country is so important, bringing the knowledge cycles together. The principles of conservation have been, in my communities forever. And unfortunately, still today, Aboriginal and Islander people do not have the recognition and access to country that we, and that's a really important we, have requested and is our right. So I just want to encourage bush heritage to keep taking chances, to ask the hard questions of itself and bring Aboriginal people into the circle and, continue to be inclusive and further develop partnerships built on equity. We're leading the way for so many other people. Yeah, it can be often an area we're not sure of, and that's why you have people like us helping you and working together. There's still much work to be done, but by simply asking and including, standing together with us mob, the country will heal and so will our communities. And, I heard a statement the other day that, that there are many ways forward and many solutions to this, but I truly believe at the end of the day, there's only one way, and it's one way together. And I think that's what bush heritage is good at, is taking those chances, bringing people in, having those hard conversations about, partnerships on equity, land acquisition and the removal of land from Aboriginal people for the You know, probably in my experience for the last 120 years, the political system's been about removal of country. And we're in a cycle now where we're handing back country, and we bring skills around management, we bring skills around planning, we bring skills around conservancy, and these are all areas that our Aboriginal communities are really hungry for. We're often given back the worst parcels of land. They're absolutely flogged. They've genuinely given to Aboriginal communities because they think there's nothing of value. So to have an organisation to partner with that can do that planning and conservation and land management, that's prepared to show resilience and come back and ask every year. That word resilience is really important because we have to time our work and our business to the time of the community and understand that communities are running at different speeds. And being able to just come back each year and sit with that community, that mob, and build those partnerships will be the sustainable foundation for the future success. So, you know, I proudly sell that out in the community. I've done it away from the Bush Heritage's table, and I see it with Bush Heritage as a partner. So, yeah, I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. It will be a bumpy road, but the outcomes are just going to be so much better when we do it and you know, that one way together.
I think Vikki and Bruce, I mean, that just, what you both explained here is the benefits truly outweigh, you know, anything when it comes to looking after country, how best to do it in partnership, in collaboration, to bring your knowledge and mindsets together, because in the end, we want a healthy country and we want it for all Australians. And I think there's a mention in the text box about a voice to Parliament. That does help. You know, we're talking about the Uluru Statement of the Heart. It's certainly one of the things that at the moment is at the forefront when it comes to some of the discussions that are happening at that level. But when it comes to natural resource management and working in the conservation sector, I really believe, you know, after what Bruce and Vikki, what you've talked about is so vital in working together and understanding that this is the time. The time is now, you know, it definitely is now. So I guess that leads me on to, I know that, I will say for those that have asked a couple of questions, thank you for those. We will get to those very shortly. So, and Bruce and Vikki, I'll have those lined up for you shortly. So the other question I need to ask both yourself, Vikki and Bruce, is how can we ensure that an Aboriginal voice in land management decision making? How do we ensure that happens? Bruce, can I ask you first?
Sure. Look, I think it's so valuable that we acknowledge country in our meetings. But the next step is taking it to the next level where we actually meet with the people. We understand the groups connected to country via language and via their cultural law. And that's a big call. I don't expect everyone to know how to do that. And I'm a really, you know, skilled operator in that space. And often I will say I don't have to understand everything about ecology because I got some of the best deadly ecologists working with me and I just know how to ask. So I encourage that open conversation about bringing the Aboriginal knowledge to understand, you know, the cultural obligation to country from traditional owners. I think it's also really important to understand about how Aboriginal people have moved across the landscape, either in a political sense or how they've been moved off or onto country, because often that is how we're going to get them back to country. And that often gives us an understanding of the level of interaction we need and the commitment we need. Some communities are ready to go, they're flying, they've been in this space a long time. Other people have so many social justice and family issues on their plate that, you know, getting country is way down the priority list when, you know, there are deaths in community and there are these really serious issues. So having an understanding of that's really important and using the knowledge internally. You know, it has to be a strong voice. It has to be a voice of the right people, and often that is hard to achieve. I think we're right on the track by doing our healthy country plans, by involving Aboriginal people in those, but understanding that the healthy country plan that we develop is Aboriginal people's plan. It's the plan of the traditional owners, owned by them, managed by them, and interpreted by them. We're a partner. We're a significant partner, but that's a guidance that the community gives us. It's really important that we understand about the protected lands that are now evolving through native title. As an applicant on a native title process, I can say it's fraught with danger and it's built around corporations law, and it's not the best answer in town. But unfortunately, as Aboriginal people, we need to engage in native title, otherwise we lose our identity. And if we lose our identity, we lose our language and we lose our connection to country. So native title is a really important issue that, again, you have great resources internally, and we're starting to put information up within Bush Heritage so that people can, start to have small videos about certain topics to get understanding and around it. I think our job as leaders in our community is to generate discussion. And that's something that we do really well, and we're doing today, not to bring all the answers. The answers is a journey, and we're on this journey together, but it's our role as leaders to bring open and frank discussion around the issues put before us, and then how we all walk this journey together to get to, it actually never ends. It's a continuous journey, and in partnership, as Shoni has said.
Really good, quite a few really good points there, Bruce. And being that to ensure that the Aboriginal voice in land management is being heard at decision-making levels, it's also about having those Aboriginal people in many different areas and sectors of the different NRM conservation sectors. So those that are in senior leadership, those that are on the ground that are working, and those that are working at many different levels. But really good. Vikki, I'm interested to hear your perspective on some of these good points that Bruce has brought up as well.
Yeah, following on, I'm going to touch on some of those similar points, but from the work that I'm currently doing with Bush Heritage, there were two things that come to mind when we talk about ensuring engagement of traditional owners in land management and conservation. Two areas, of course, that Bruce mentioned is the importance of those conversations itself, starting those conversations, becoming aware of history. Even a great example today for all of you who have added into the chat and acknowledge the lands of the country that you stand on. It's that starting point, little steps as simple as that, to understand Aboriginal people and the country that you are actually living on and where you work and reside. They are all meaningful steps towards having those conversations. Starting that engagement in itself is another really big avenue that is one big point that we deal with all the time in partnerships. Having meaningful engagement, having transparency in the conversations that we do, allowing traditional owners to be fully informed about the conversations, about the work that we're trying to achieve, about the goals and the targets. Are those goals and targets or objectives similar aspirations that traditional owners have for country? 9 times out of 10, of course, they are. Science framework, when we talk about ecology at Bush Heritage, is not very separate from Indigenous knowledge systems and things that we hold so close to our own hearts, and what connects us through our law, our ceremony, our country, our resources. As Bruce said, that is what continues our connection. That's what strengthens our identity. So ensuring through Aboriginal partnerships that we are engaging meaningfully with people, and that we are giving them opportunities to participate, to have those conversations and come back, as we mentioned before, again, only just strengthens the joint outcomes that everybody can achieve. At Bush Heritage, we want to protect lands for future generations. That's not so different from what our elders teach us growing up, and the transition of knowledge that comes down through our family line. The importance of that knowledge to transition to the next generation. So a lot of the aspirations that and the work that we're doing here collaboratively at Bush Heritage is not very different from the value systems of Aboriginal communities. And that is so important. Making sure that, we continue to maintain those connections, we continue those relationships. Relationships are always ongoing. It's no different from your personal relationships with your friends and your family. There's going to be those good times, and there's going to come the bad as well. And it's about investing the time in those partnerships to keep maintaining them, and making sure that, all right, if there is something that people aren't happy about, how can we work together to overcome that and still achieve the best outcomes for everybody? So I can't stress enough the importance of that partnerships, and that long-term connections for people, and having the consistent I suppose future programs as well, so that we can continue to pull people back and have that active ongoing connection, so that those future generations will be able to continue taking up where we leave off.
That was beautifully said, as always, Bruce and Vikki, brother and sister. I'm saying brother and sister just for everyone listening. I'm not saying Bruce and Vikki, but we call each other brother and sister because we're all connected. We're all part of a mob. And I just think that both of you, I look up to, Bruce and Vikki. I look to you both. You are amazing people. You get up, you stand up, you show up, but you're there, you're on the ground, you're in policy, or, you're at many different levels having these discussions and ensuring that not only is an Aboriginal voice being heard, but action's being done, because there is a difference. There is a difference between us talking the talk, but actually walking the walk. So I really appreciate, the conversations that we're having right now in this yarn. We have got a couple of questions I would love to talk to you about, because there's a couple of them here I thought that we could definitely give these ones a go. So Vikki, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask, one of the questions that we have is about the bushfires, the recent bushfires. Mm-hmm. And it says, since the bushfires, where exactly are there on the ground involvement with First Nations people being actively consulted, involved in land management? Are you able to answer that one for us?
Thanks, Chontarle. That's a really good question, and it's one that is growing a lot of interest and momentum at the moment. So I'm based in New South Wales. Just to put it out there, all states operate under different legislation and frameworks. So the conversations right across the nation are quite interesting. They can be stagnated at different stages depending on the state or the territory. I can speak for my experiences here in New South Wales. So where I live, my community was directly impacted by the 2019-2020 bushfires. The conversations down here in New South Wales is now there's a broader interest from non-Aboriginal Australia, where people are starting to look at, I suppose, the previous frameworks and the legislation and the methodologies that we've used in the past may not necessarily, have been with really, there've been some really bad outcomes as a result of fire management and poor land management practices in the past. So in New South Wales at the moment, I know that there's a number of government agencies that are starting to look into how they can support Aboriginal communities better. We've got on a national level, there's other Indigenous organisations that are going around supporting communities to actually set up Aboriginal fire ranger teams. That's something else that we can actively take a leadership role in at Bush Heritage at the moment, because the current climate is actually demanding that we look at other alternative means to managing country. And if Indigenous knowledge systems can help support that conversation, people are very open to that at the moment. I was actually just on another meeting this morning with a professor down at Victoria at one of the universities. So there's even a project steering committee that I'm aware of that's coming forward down there, and that's to try and address some of the frameworks at present and look at better support systems. At a higher level, more universities and researchers are getting involved in this conversation. So they're actually identifying a number of barriers that are not just impacting one particular state, but affect all Indigenous people right across Australia at the moment in terms of our fire management practices. Some of it is about revitalising that knowledge in those systems, and also by networking and sharing that information across the broader communities. So a lot of Aboriginal groups at the moment are becoming quite proactive. There's more investment at the moment locally with dollars available as well to help support getting Indigenous fire ranger groups up off the ground and running. So that in the long run is only going to, again, strengthen any outcomes and benefit all Australians, basically, because we are saying that we do have the answer. We can and do have tools and knowledge for country, and that specific knowledge lies directly with, the traditional owners on the landscape that you live in. And I know that one of the recent conversations I can share with you is even having a conversation with a scientist down here who made a comment about that knowledge had been lost some years ago. But as a child growing up, I actually have memories of watching my grandfather burn his property on country himself without fear of having to be evacuated during fire season and things like that. only just minor sort of memories that I have because I was a young child at the time, but it was an active part of his knowledge that he'd obviously been passed down, and his sense of, or intimate knowledge of his knowledge of the country there, his understanding of when it was time to burn, when it was that time frame and the right conditions. And there's a few funny stories even about, rural fire service turning up and arguing with my grandfather and him telling them that the fire would burn out at a certain time when the wind came up in the afternoons. And sure enough, the predictions happened. So, and he did that as an Aboriginal man, to protect his family and as I said, with that intimate knowledge of country. So at the moment, there's a lot of momentum, as I said, happening. There's a lot of investment. I think people should closely watch this space because it's one that is definitely growing at the moment with investment from state and also federal governments.
And I'd just like to jump in there and support what Vikki said. That we had this bizarre situation in South Australia where we were invited to do a smoking ceremony for the cultural burn, and because we weren't accredited, we were then ordered off the land. So one of the key elements around this policy framework was to get Aboriginal people in the yellow suits, get them accredited, make them accredited firefighters so we can do our cultural burns. But when there's a wildfire, we've got a resource out there. We've got young Aboriginal men and women who are trained and capable around fire management. And, they're often sharing skills, breaking down barriers, their leadership in their communities, their mentors to the young people. And they're so proud to be, working shoulder to shoulder with non-Aboriginal and Islander people to save townships and to save communities. And then the question begs, okay, if we've got a wildfire, if we do the cultural practice, which the same people are on the team, the wildfires are reduced, the fires are colder. The native species are closer, easier to hunt. There's a regeneration of native species that require fire. There's all these different elements that the traditional burning brings to it. And Bushfires SA and Country Fire Service are really attuned to this now. And rather than ignoring us and ordering us off a country, they're inviting us in. And to Bush Heritage's credit, we've got a fire training session coming up, and we're asking the traditional owners if they want to participate and be accredited. And we'll make sure through our funding that they get the yellow suits and they're accredited and ready to go. It's not only about a partnership with Bush Heritage. They then become leaders in their own community, and they partner with the local firefighting people. And when they're all sitting down and at a social event, they all look at each other differently. So, we have many layers of social agendas here that Bush Heritage supports just by inviting people into that fire practice.
That's beautifully said. And I think just going on, this really leads on to another question. I've got two questions sitting here, Vikki and Bruce, that'll lead on to what we've just talked about. It's asking about the question about being Australian. So one is saying that, it's our responsibility to show up, stand up. And others are saying, unless we are all in it, we will be the lesser. Isn't it possible to arrive at something that includes all? A national day that encompasses us all would be a good start. Over half of Australia's current population are now born overseas. And Vikki and Bruce, the question really lies is, do you think there's an opportunity here? An opportunity for non-Aboriginal and Islander Australians? What can they do? And to support, and what can they do as Australians?
I'm going to jump in straight away, Shani. I can't stop you on this one. Look, absolutely. I wouldn't get out of bed. I get out of bed every day for this partnership. That one way together is absolutely the only way that we can do it. I've told people I need to capture their souls and put them in a jar to work with me and walk with me because, we're tired of doing it by ourselves and we just can't achieve what we need to do to come together. There's that saying out in the marketplace, which is absolutely true. If you acknowledge Aboriginal history, you don't lose 200 years of non-Aboriginal history, you gain 60,000 years of shared history. So we really are a partnership. And I think that word partnership isn't overused within our circles. We've just got to action it and how we bring people together. And I'll put it out there that not everyone has the knowledge to deal with it at this level. We often will ask the really hard questions. Today, I'll open our hearts and souls to you and say, sometimes it's a bit overwhelming to ask the hard questions in a forum of, 300 or 400 people in a Zoom meeting. We offer that opportunity to give us a call. We're on call. There's an email thread. We're always happy to have a yarn away from this table. You know, it's such a joy to have a good question. There are no wrong questions, and to help people work through it together, and to know that they're going to go and question that over their kitchen table, and they're going to stand up when they see an injustice. And it's not necessarily just an injustice in the Aboriginal communities. You know, we are in the lower socioeconomic scheme of things. So if you help Aboriginal and Islander people get a hand up, not a handout, the whole society benefits. So we've grown up in that shared partnership. I'm a proud Australian. I'm a proud Aboriginal man who now has ties to country that I declare openly. But many people don't have that because of the way their country was removed. So we've got to work with them mobs and sit down with them and say, okay, this is your space. And maybe rebuilding language is important because language tells you who you are, and acknowledging that language. But absolutely, we're doing it together. I do want to comment, and I'm going to get really political here, about the voice to Parliament. You know, we're not a caucus. We're not to be ignored. We're a nation. You know, the Uluru Statement from the Heart was thrown under a bus before our politicians even got on the plane. They'd made a decision, that we're not going to listen to this. ATSIC, the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Commission, was a great element. It had a few issues, but it was thrown out. We've had a whole banking system that was proven to be corrupt, and no one got the sack. But it's easy to tear down a whole Aboriginal representative organisation that is elected by community that was a strong voice to Parliament, and it kicked a lot of goals. So not only do we need that voice to Parliament, it needs to be valued. And I think conservancy, connection to country, is going to be the way we're going to connect that voice to Parliament to be real outcomes for our mobs. And when I say our mobs, I'm including everyone that's listening today. I'm including all their families. I'm including all of their sporting clubs. I'm including all of their connections to country and to people, because that's the same for me. It's not just about us mobs. So don't for a minute think when we're talking about us mobs that you're not included. I think we need to say that so that us mobs, we are one together.
Right. Vikki, I actually have another question for you. And, Bruce, before I flick over to Vikki for this next question, there's a couple of, I have to say this because there's a couple of people in the chat that have said we should put a couple of your quotes on a shirt, which makes me smile because those that work for Bush Heritage do know that Bruce loves putting quotes on shirts. So I think it's quite timely for one of our participants to have said, oh, that would be really great in a shirt. So Bruce, have you got a shirt there to show us? What have you got? Blackivist since 1788. So we'll have to take one of your other quotes, Bruce, and get that on a shirt by the sounds of things.
That's one of my non-political ones.
Very true. Vikki, there's a really good question here, and I thought that you'd be the best placed answering this. And it's in regards to access. So this person has, and I'm sorry that I haven't got the name of this person that's asked this question. It's a lot more challenging for TOs to get access to their country in Southeast Australia compared to the North and West. And I will say that I think my country sits in this same category. And there's far fewer native title determinations. How can we address that, Vikki?
That is a really good question, and it's not a quick or simple answer either. So again, I think it comes back to some of the conversation we had before about, people understanding colonisation and our former history that has led to where we are today with the, we do have in New South Wales some really big issues in terms of access to lands. I've always looked at it from a bigger point of view that since colonisation, much more of the landscape here was heavily impacted. So in the past, we have frameworks where moving forward, governments, in particular in New South Wales, we have a lot of national parks and state forests that have got really large land tenure. And that is notably in some of the most, important landscape areas on our countries in New South Wales. So yes, there are a lot of issues around that, but thankfully we can say that there are a lot more joint management programs that are coming into place. And I believe I was just able to receive an email just in the last few days stating that the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service is now going to hand back the national parks to traditional owners under more joint management programs, and trying to also support and assist with more ranger programs at the same time. So that will again empower traditional owners, open access into some of those landscapes, but it's still a big conversation to have. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, we've been impacted by fire down here. So a lot of those important landscapes that had our rock art sites, significant places like that were heavily impacted, but this might actually open those conversations so that people can get access, go back into and revisit those places and make decisions about whether they want to invest in going back and restoring artwork or doing, site conservation works and mitigation protection measures, so that if future events like that happen again, that they won't be so heavily impacted. But again, it's part of a growing conversation. I've even noticed in the last probably 20 years of my professional career that I have seen a mindset change, a shift, where much more people are coming forward. They're open to those conversations and understanding just how important it is for traditional owners with that connection to country and the way that we actually view the landscape, the way that we look at country. I often say that we have these cultural goggles. You spend some time out in the field with us and you'll get your cultural goggles and you'll be able to see the landscape and interpret the land the same way that we do when we walk on country. So it is a positive shift at the moment. And I think that that's been more politically driven since climate change is coming more to the forefront with the conversations. So I think that there's some really positive outcomes and people should watch that space in future. It's definitely started. And I think even with some of the recent political changes that we're experiencing here in Australia, we're going to see that start to filter down even at a government level. So yeah, some really exciting stuff to watch from here moving forward.
Absolutely. And you mentioned climate change, Vikki, and I think, we talk about fire a lot. And we talk about fire for many reasons, cultural reasons, and the devastation a wildfire can cause. But the one thing we haven't spoken about today is the importance of water and cultural water flows. And one of the questions that has been posed to us today is, what about flood management? Are there any actions that can support flood mitigation? Which is interesting because you just mentioned about climate change, and of course, I was listening to the news on the way home from work yesterday, and they were talking about the flooding and then talking about the rain on the East Coast. I really feel for you, mob, over there, because that is a lot of rain and that is a lot of flooding. And one of the citizens, I'm going to say citizens or community member they were interviewing on the radio, had commented and saying and pointing a lot of blame at the government. And I sat, I'm driving, and then I've got traffic lights where I live, so I sat at the traffic lights. And I thought, it's actually all of our responsibility. It is all of our responsibility. We can't lay blame on government. We have to take responsibility ourselves. And that is also with climate change. We've caused a lot of these issues. We need to change it. And I always think, who are the best people to listen to? People have been here for over 60,000 years, maybe. So it's important for us to work together to actually come up with some solutions to some of these issues. And like the flooding that's happening on the East Coast. I think there is another question here. Bruce and Vic, would you mind if I answered it? Because the question is about some specific examples of bush heritage properties and partnerships and what's happening on the ground. So, Vikki, you've talked about, the fire cultural burns, which have been, I love it. Vikki, sometimes Bruce sends me a photo and I go, oh, I'm jealous. I want to be out there with you, Vic. And then over this way, in Western Australia, we work with we've got what we call on-reserve and off-reserve relationships. So our on-reserves are the parts of the country where someone's mentioned earlier about native title where these reserves are not exclusive native title determined, and we work in partnership, for example, with the Mulgana Aboriginal Corporation, and we work with that corporation to to work towards their aspiration and goals for the Mulgana community. We do the same with the Nunda community, and the Nunda community, they've been out on the reserve called Urati Reserve. It's a beautiful reserve with a beautiful cultural water flow, and they go out every year. This particular family go out and they clear out that water hole, part of their cultural obligation, but also being out on country, you can just see their spirit, their vibe lift. They're like a completely different person, because it's also about them regaining their strength in themselves, and it really benefits health and well-being, and also showing the younger ones that are with them. We're also, when we say we work off reserve, those reserves are where maybe native title was determined, and we work up in, say, we work with a group called Wunabugumbra and Gurrajari up in the far north. I'm looking up at a map above me, my apologies. Up in the far north of the Kimberley of Western Australia, where there's a lot happening, where we're supporting the ranger groups out in the ground, and they're doing all sorts of activities out and protecting and looking after their country in many different ways. But that would take forever to go through all of those. So I won't go to the specifics, but we can definitely get back to you if you'd like to know more. And the other way of finding out more is actually going to Bush Heritage's website, follow our blogs, follow our social media. Go for it, Bruce.
Yeah, I just quickly will jump in. We've done some of the biggest soil conservation and hydrology works with traditional owners at Pulkamata, and that's full site clearances, full meetings on country. It required heavy equipment and lots of dollars. I described the holes as, like 3 Hiluxes deep and 8 Hiluxes wide. And everyone knows in our space how big a Hilux is, and it was massive. And our mobs get it. They understand once they're involved in a partnership of equity, they get it. And to agree to get that work done, I think, have a snapshot on some of the work that was previously done through previous managers, and now Tim's Wisdom's got leadership and carriage of it, and some of the soil conservation hydrology work in the arid rangelands that is world leading, I think, is really important. So have a look on the website. There's a bit of word about it, but that's been done in full partnership with the traditional owners, the Norntak, Ngunyatjara, Willikali groups, and the same with our other reserve where we worked with the Untukarinumara, Yunkajara mobs. So yeah, have a look on the website. It's all there out to be seen, but great outcomes.
That's a really good example, Bruce. Actually, while I've got you, Bruce, there is a question here about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are leading in the decolonisation of the conservation land management sector, which I completely agree with. Thank you for the question, Hamish. But Bruce, what do you think are the key changes that are still needed?
Oh, look, I see my leaders standing up in this space all the time and being ignored. They drive 400 kilometres to come and speak at a forum, a public forum about, the Pastoral Act and management of country, and they're ignored. I think, firstly, we have to understand the leadership capacity that's coming to the table and understand the knowledge that they're bringing and value it. I mean, we do, and we constantly, the Makarrata, the Uluru Statement of the Heart, is a perfect example of the solution-based outcomes of Aboriginal people in connection to country, and it's been ignored. There's royal commissions into whole heaps of stuff that when it's Aboriginal, it doesn't get listened to. So I think, the solutions are already on the table. I think we just need to refocus and bring those solutions back to the table and do what we can achieve now. Doing something is definitely better than doing nothing. And we're in a constant political and social environment that prefers to do nothing than take a risk. So I encourage you to come on the journey with us, take a risk. Apologies for that sunlight coming in the background there. Take a risk with us and get some of the problem fixed and done rather than doing nothing. And I think Bush Heritage is extremely well placed to do that. And yes, we do have a lot of work before us. And that I was saying, yes, how do you need an elephant? Well, you do it one bite at a time, and let's achieve together, do those small steps. And, small steps become long steps, become a marathon. So, yeah, I really think, we are well placed.
Absolutely. That's really spot on. I think, Vikki, there is that conversation around, we're talking about conservation estates, conservation sectors. How would you encourage farmers and those in the agricultural space to develop similar partnerships in caring for country in that sector of our community?
From my understanding too, there's a massive investment in that whole industry at the moment too, to have a look at what type of systems they can utilise to improve farming outcomes, stock, all of that kind of stuff. And they're impacted and affected by exactly the same things that we were talking about before in terms of water on lands. And I know at Bush Heritage, that's something we're starting to invest in now, is looking at, rehydration in landscapes. How do we restore waterways and those kind of things as well? I just recently was a part of fire training out at Wagga recently, and it was really interesting to actually hear the fire trainer out there even talking about, cane farmers that are interested at the moment in investing and looking at different ways of using fire in their everyday operations, and how they can utilise that to improve the type of cane production long term, and pest management. And there's a whole range of different incentives, I suppose, coming through at that point in time. So the overall outcome at the moment is that much more organisations and government levels are investing in that sector. They're looking at it. They want to, there's funding available also for, if landowners have Aboriginal sites on their properties, there's money there that, they can actually work quite closely alongside of traditional owners to, one, improve the outcomes on their property, but also to give Aboriginal people access and, again, become a part of the processes and conversations. But it's all steps that have to be taken, I suppose, at that local level with those industry producers and the farmers themselves, and that willingness, again, going back to the previous conversations that we've started today around NAIDOC, about having that transparency, starting conversations and understanding whose land you're living on, whose landscape are you actually managing, and the people that have walked that landscape well before, maybe your family, and if it has been in the land, family 5 generations, who was there before your family got there. So again, opening that doorway, being open to the conversation and being prepared to work with people to develop that relationship. But there's plenty of support and funding at the moment out there to help a lot of people and farmers around agriculture, so that First Nations people can get back in and be a part of that conversation with them. And we talked today quite a few times about, it's a collective, collaborative effort on everybody's part. And I've often said, growing up, I walk 2 worlds. I come from both worlds. My father's white Australian and my mother is a Yuin Walbunja woman from the South Coast. I walk those 2 worlds and navigate that each day. And I tell people that we have shared country, shared responsibility. So, the wider, I suppose, view, in my opinion, there is that it's everybody's responsibility to take part in that. And if farmers would like to be a part of that conversation, we're willing to work with you.
Yeah, no, I'll just jump in there too and say, look, Aboriginal and Islander people are farmers too. It's not mutually exclusive. And I really want to put it out there. It's our responsibility to have that conversation. Managing country is farming. Managing the fire, managing what grows on the country, managing the native species is farming. It's just described differently with our mobs. So, yeah, let's get that conversation started and engage in that space.
Absolutely. And I think that extends to urbanised settings and suburban acreages as well. There was a couple of questions which, unfortunately, we're just starting to run out of time that we can't get to. But if we apply the whole, I guess, the point about holding these conversations, building relationships, they apply across all sectors of any field. So if we're talking about agricultural sector, we're talking about farmers, pastoralists. It's about having the conversation. It's about those relationships and being involved. But this also applies to a suburban setting. So for those that have asked a couple of questions in that regard, we can always get back to you. We can email you back if you, as you've registered, you've left your email to us. But I'm sorry to say, but we're actually just running out of time. But we're out of time. But I want to thank Bruce and Vikki. I really want to thank you. A huge thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule this NAIDOC week. And I really love working with both of you, but also working with the Bush Heritage hat on. But what comes foremost and first is as First Nations people, and that we will stand up, show up, and be present with the work and who we are and how we lead and work with our communities. So I hope everyone's enjoyed today's yarn. And if you'd like to find out more about the Aboriginal Partnerships of Bush Heritage, please check out the link in the chat. And also, we're going to end today's NAIDOC yarn with a video about our Aboriginal Partnerships space in Bush Heritage. So please hold on when we finish having a chat. There's only a few days left of NAIDOC, so please get involved in your local events. I thank you all for your participation today and those beautiful questions, and I apologise that we couldn't get to them all, but thank you everyone, and in my language, Borua. Bruce and Vikki, again, thanks so much.
Happy NAIDOC.
Bye.
My name is Sissy Gore-Birch. I'm the National Aboriginal Engagement Manager with Bush Heritage Australia. So I'm a Kimberley woman and I was brought up on Balangara country. Aboriginal people have been managing this country for 40,000 plus years. So it's very important that we have an organisation like Bush Heritage working together closely to continue to assist with conservation and land management, to protect what Aboriginal people have been trying to protect for a very long time. So looking at that two-way science is really important for Bush Heritage and moving forward with that.
So one of the real strengths of any good ranger program and organisation is its partnerships, and Bush Heritage have been a really strong partner in the last few years with Arafura Swamp Rangers, and that partnership has been about helping develop our healthy country plan, our vision for the future, and they've really supported that in providing a lot of the capacity to bring that plan together.
Pullin is the Aboriginal name for the night parrot. Feathers were in our ceremonial headdress used in our major corroborees. It's kind of been reborn, and I find there's a symbiotic relationship now to be involved with Bush Heritage to protect the bird and protect our culture.
It's been a really beneficial exercise. We found some flints, some hammerstones, quite a few small heads that we used as spearheads, but the most important find, or special find really, was a piece of petrified wood which we estimate is about 95 to 98 million years old, and that was in the shape of an axe head.
That's why it's good that Bush Heritage have got us out here doing this, so we can find all this, so they're protected forever.
I think Bush Heritage have got a really good grasp on what we do here as Dja Dja Wurrung people and what our aspirations are, and I would just love to see that even grow a bit more and have our wider Dja Dja Wurrung community understand what Bush Heritage are doing, and build that more connection and I suppose with our families to understand that you know the aspirations of Bush Heritage and what they're doing on their properties are the same as what Dja Dja Wurrungs are.
You've got to go out and do partnership with other people that got the expertise and help that, and let them get involved and work together. And this project proven that yes, we can work together. Hopefully, one of the targets with the Bush Heritage Mob and us local people, hopefully we'll have the golden-shouldered parrot big mob with them. We're on the borderline of them being gone down and never seeing them again, or whether the project what we're doing now is to bring their population up.
Well, Bush Heritage Australia is really proud to be Olcola's partner of choice for this project, not only to be securing the future of an endangered species, but also to be supporting Olcola traditional owners to care for and to protect one of their most significant cultural totems for future generations.
This is traditional owner land, it always has been and always will be. It's just an absolute privilege to work with Budgie traditional owners, and it's so important that Budgie are involved in continuing to manage their country side by side with us at Bush Heritage.
I promised my mum a long time ago that I'd take care of country, and I have been doing my job pretty good, I think.
Feel good when you're out here, and the rangers are doing good work. They're sharing their stories, they're learning, they're passing on knowledge. The older ones are teaching the younger ones about their culture and their language and bush tucker and fire and how to read the landscape, and we're providing or helping them with opportunities to get out on country.